bit better. Good morning. Good morning. There we are. At least 3 of you are here. Good morning. Welcome to Life Church. We're super excited you're here. If you guys want to stand and worship with us this morning.
They put up with me. Dang, I'm gonna break this thing again. Okay, I won't touch things. It's great to see you all out this morning. You can go ahead and stand back up because we're going to greet one another. Find somebody you know, shake their hand. Find somebody you don't, hug them. sound means our kids are making their way to the back and everybody else is finding a seat. You can sit down this time. It's okay. You'll be back up in a minute, but you have at least 4 seconds. All right, I have a few announcements. The first of which, you probably already know because we're in here, but we are in full renovation mode over in our sanctuary. With that being said, we need anybody and everybody who has free time. There's 1,000 things to do and only, 2 people to do it. So anybody that has free time, we will find something for you to do. If you'll just let one of us on staff know, we will, I promise, you will not go shy on work. The second thing is student night is April 14th at 6:30. We will be going bowling. So next Sunday night, bowling. Are we meeting here?
Yeah.
Meet here, and then we will make our way to the bowling alley from there. Be here at 6:15. Okay? And the last of which is Easter. Yes, I forgot this last week. These cards. We gave you one last week. Now there's a whole stack in the back. So I hope you gave these to somebody already. Pick up some more on your way out. Invite them to our Easter service, which, if all goes well, we will be back in the sanctuary for. I will pray for us and we'll go from there. Heavenly Father God, we just thank you for this beautiful day. The rain is gone and the sun is out, and we get to be here to worship your name. God, we thank you for the opportunity to do that, because there are so many places in the world that don't have this luxury. So God, as we enter this time of worship, let us turn our hearts towards you and away from any distractions. And God, let us just purely praise your name. We thank you for this day and thank you for this time. In your name we pray. Amen.
All right, y'all can stand as we continue in worship this morning.
The sun
a time where we get to give back a little bit, I just wanted to stress one of the things that this goes towards. Now, as many of you know, Easter is coming up. Clearly, I forget, but as Easter is coming up, we're doing an event called Glow in the Park. That's what the papers in your seats are about. There's a lot that goes into this event, and there's a lot of ways that you can give towards it. Now, if you have the time and can volunteer, if you'd fill that out, you can put it in the offering plate, or there's a drop box in the back on the black table. You can drop it in there, and there's a box for candy in the back. So if you're not able to make the event for some reason, if you can bring candy and drop it off, that's a huge help. This is a huge way that we get to connect with our community. There's 100 to 200 kids that show up to this. Great way for us to show the community that we care about them. So if you can give in this way, that would be great. I'll pray for us and turn it over there. Heavenly Father God, let us remember that nothing is ours. God, our time, our work, nothing is truly ours. Lord, when we look at it in that way, give us the ability to give freely, because we know that you're just allowing us to borrow it. God, let us give with an open heart and take that giving and use it for the glory of your kingdom. Allow people to be reached, lives to be saved. God, show the community around us that we love them and we do desire for their good. God, we thank you for the means to be here and the means to give. God, we just ask that you use that for your glory. Amen.
tomb where soldiers marched in vain, was bottled for 3 days. His body there would not remain. Our God is from the grave. Our God is from the grave. Yes, He has. Watch, I'll stand and sing this for your name. Your name is victory. All praise will rise to Christ our King. Your name is victory. All praise will rise to Christ our King. By your Spirit I will rise from the ashes of defeat. The resurrected King is resurrecting me. In your name I come alive to declare your victory. The resurrected King is resurrecting me. By your Spirit I will rise from the ashes of defeat. The resurrected King is resurrecting me. In your name I come alive to declare your victory. The resurrected King is resurrecting me. By your Spirit I will rise from the ashes of defeat. The resurrected King is resurrecting me. In your name I come alive to declare your victory. The resurrected King is resurrecting me. The resurrected King is resurrecting me. Oh, He's resurrecting me. Oh. God, we're thankful that you sent your Son. God, He would leave perfection and come to the earth to live as one of us, to carry all of our sin and shame and die on the cross, to seal the victory. God, your name is victory. God, I pray that John comes up and we hear this morning the message that you've laid upon him, God, that we just be enriched, that we tune our ears to listen to the words that have been set in front of us for the betterment of the kingdom. It's in your name we pray. Amen.
Good morning. Am I on? Yep, I am. I know other people told you good morning, but I haven't, so. Are you ready? Some of you are like, I don't know. What's going to happen? It's a simple question. Are you ready? Are you prepared? Are you ready for what's going to happen next? And the simple answer is yes. You're ready for whatever is going to happen to you next. Just the question of what's going to happen to you next. Right? It's a simple question that we might not know the answer to, but we try to put a lot of thought into every single day of being ready, right? You wake up in the morning and your goal is to be ready. What do you do when you wake up? You kind of assess your day. If you're going to work the next day or you have a busy day, maybe you go to bed early. Maybe you set your alarm for the morning to be ready. You take a shower, I hope. If you didn't, the person next to you can let you know. brush your teeth in the morning, you brush your hair, you do all those things to be ready. You might check your calendar, you check the weather, you look to see if it's going to rain, you bring an umbrella with you if you think it might rain, or however you think you need to be ready for the day. You prepare accordingly, but what happens when you're not ready? What happens when your day gives you something that you weren't expecting? You go out and you didn't know it was going to rain, and then it does rain and you don't have an umbrella. Or what happens when you wake up and you thought you had a lazy day of doing nothing and you realize it is a busy day of doing a lot of stuff? And you find out very quickly whether or not you were ready for that day. It's one of my deep fears in life, not being ready. I have one reoccurring nightmare. It always is about Sunday mornings. My nightmare goes something like this. No, yeah, I love y'all. That's not like that. It goes like I show up on a Sunday morning and I like get ready to walk up, and I get up here and I realize like I've got nothing. Like in my mind, I realize like I didn't prepare anything. And believe it or not, it actually takes time to figure out what I'm going to say up here. And I'll get up here in my dream and then I have nothing. And I just think like I'm not ready for this. I don't know what to do. And everybody's staring at me. I promise that's not today. In my dream, that's how it happens. I'm not ready, and then it hits me. I am ready. I'm just not ready to succeed. I'm not ready to speak. I'm ready for failure. That's what I'm ready for. That's what I'm primed and I'm prepped in my life, and that dream has prepared me for failure. See, the reality is no matter what I'm doing in life, I'm ready. I am prepared for something. The question is, what is the something that my life has now prepared me for? Are you ready? You are. The question is, what are you ready for? We're in this series called Following Jesus. We've been looking at the life of Jesus in the book of Mark, and if you don't know where this is going to the end of the book of Mark, which is going to celebrate the resurrection. We're going to celebrate that on Easter. That's coming up in 2 weeks. JP, coming up in 2 weeks. We've been looking at what does it look like to follow Jesus? What does it look like to be his follower, somebody who puts their life after him? And as we've examined what Jesus is doing in people's lives, and we're getting ready to see Jesus give himself as a sacrifice, the culmination of all the events in his life, we see his preparedness. We see what he is ready for, what he is willing to do. We've taken that in our lives to say, okay, what is God willing to do in our lives? What is Jesus willing to do in our lives? And the question that we begin to have to answer is, are we ready for what Jesus is willing to do in our lives? Because we have a Jesus who is offering so much and willing to do so much and willing to get involved and willing to speak truth into our lives. And the question is, are we ready for what he is going to do? And so we look at a story this morning to see not only Jesus' preparedness for what he was going to do, but the people around him to find out, were they prepared for what he was going to do? Or were they ready for something else? As we look at the people around Jesus, we're going to find some who are ready to follow him, and some who are ready to fade away. As we look at their lives, we're going to try to answer the question, what am I prepared for? What am I ready for? What is my life getting me ready for in my relationship with God? If you have a Bible, I'm going to invite you to open up to Mark chapter 14. Mark chapter 14 is we're going to read the first few verses of this chapter together. If you don't have a Bible, you're more than welcome to follow along with me on the screens. We're going to have it right up here for you as we read the first 11 verses of this chapter. It says this: It was 2 days before the Passover and the festival of unleavened bread. The chief priests and the scribes were looking for a cunning way to arrest Jesus and kill him. Not during the festival, they said, so there won't be a riot among the people. While he was in Bethany, that's Jesus, at the house of Simon the leper, and as he was reclining at the table, a woman came with an alabaster jar of very expensive perfume of pure nard. She broke the jar and poured it on his head. But some were expressing indignation to one another. Why has this perfume been wasted? For this perfume might have been sold for more than 300 denarii and given to the poor. And they began to scold her. Jesus replied, "Leave her alone. Why are you bothering her? She has done a noble thing for me. You always have the poor with you, and you can do good for them whenever you want, but you do not always have me. She has done what she could. She has anointed my body in advance for my burial. Truly, I tell you, wherever the gospel is proclaimed in the whole world, what she has done will also be told in memory of her." Then Judas Iscariot, one of the 12, went to the chief priests to betray Jesus to them. And when they heard this, they were glad. Promised to give him money, so he started looking for a good opportunity to betray him. Stop there. What are you ready for? What has your life prepared you for? What are you preparing for in your life? How can we be prepared for what God is willing to do? We start off by seeing the preparation of the religious leaders of this day. It's no secret at this point in the book of Mark that the religious leaders don't like Jesus very much. He has disrupted their way of life. He has disrupted their teaching. He has brought into question all of their practices. And so they're fed up. They're tired of it. Jesus just went into the temple, threw a bunch of tables around, called them out in front of everybody. And their response is this: we're going to arrest this guy and we're going to kill him. We're going to be done with him. But they decided we need to wait a little bit of time because there's a lot of people who like Jesus and we don't want to cause a riot, so we got to figure out the right time. We must prepare, we must plan, we must be ready to stop what Jesus is doing. And so they're looking for this moment. That's what they are being prepared for. They don't know how, they don't know when, but that is the focus of their heart. And while this is going on, we go to a completely different scene. We find Jesus in the town of Bethany. It's just outside of Jerusalem where these religious leaders are meeting. Just outside of it, there's a town called Bethany. It's a smaller town. And Jesus is there with a group of his disciples and other people around him, and he's reclining at a table. He's sitting down after dinner likely. And as he's sitting down with this group of people, this lady walks in. We're not in this part of the story told her name, but this lady walks in. It says she has this jar of perfume. I want you to understand something about this jar of perfume. This is a very, very, very expensive jar of perfume. This jar of perfume is worth about a year's pay. Likely for something like this, it would have likely been something that was passed down in a family. So it would have been something that's not only valuable in terms of wealth. Likely this was valuable in terms of its emotional connection for this lady. And she walks up to Jesus and she does something really unusual. She takes this jar of perfume worth a year's wages and she breaks the jar open and she pours the perfume on his head. Now, this was symbolizing an anointing. See, all throughout the Bible, we find these times when somebody would be anointed with some type of oil, and they would have an oil poured over their head, showing God's favor on that person, God's chosenness of that person. And so this lady takes the best, something way better than any type of oil, this perfume, and she pours it on him. And I want you to imagine you're sitting in this room, and this smell overwhelms the room. This sweet aroma fills that place. And the response of most of the people in the room is, what is she doing? Do we understand how valuable what just happened actually is? See, she could have taken this and she could have done more with it. She could have taken this perfume and she could have sold it and she could have helped take care of the poor. She could have done some noble gesture with it. She could have taken care of her family. She could have done a lot of other things with this, but she took it and she poured it on Jesus. And why is she pouring on Jesus? And Jesus just stops everybody. He says, you don't understand what she's doing. See, what she just did is going to be talked about for generations and generations. And right here, I just want you to understand, like, we're part of what Jesus said was going to happen. Isn't that cool? Like, Jesus talked about us in this story. He said, like, way far from now, people are still going to talk about this. And we're here. We're like, hey, we're part of the story now. We're connected. He says she's going to be talked about. And here's why. Because she was preparing me for burial. And we continue to see Jesus' plan that he was going to die for our sin. And we know that that part of the story is going to come, but this is the preparedness of Jesus. But what we find is not only the preparedness of Jesus, but the preparedness of this lady. Why did she do what she did? It wasn't logical. This was not a logical use of this perfume. This wasn't a reasonable use of it. Why did she do it? Because it wasn't a logical action. It was an action of the heart. And in that act, we see that what consumes her heart reveals how and what she is actually prepared for. She is consumed by her love and devotion for Jesus, so nothing else matters. Because where your heart goes, there will go your actions. Your actions are the overflow of your heart. If we want to understand how to prepare ourselves for what Jesus is willing to do, we start here. We must be consumed by our love for him. Not just love Jesus. To be consumed by our love for him, that it drives our actions, sometimes irrationally so. Jesus, wherever you go, that's where I want to go. Whatever you say, that's what I want to do. I would give my all for you. This is what it looks like to follow Jesus. This is what it looks like when our heart is prepared. See, this is an action that you could just go and do. It's something that your heart must be ready for. I have to be honest. If I had a jar of perfume worth a year's wage, it would be pretty hard to crack that open and pour it out, even for Jesus. I just want you to put yourself in her shoes. Is that where our heart is for Jesus? Because most likely we say, Jesus, I love you, but I'll go this far. Jesus, I love you, but just this far, and this is where it stops. And this is reasonable, Jesus. You have to understand, Jesus, this is where you should stop. This is reasonable for you to ask of me, and don't ask anything further of me, because if you ask anything further of me, then that's just too much. Here's your box, Jesus. And that's what the people around Jesus are doing. Saying she did too much. Too much of a follower, too much in love with Jesus. What's in your heart? See, whatever is in your heart is what will come out when it's under pressure. See, got a can of Dr. Pepper here. And what happens if you put this under pressure? Now I just want to ask, if I were to open this up right now, what's going to come out? Dr. Pepper, right? Water? No, Dr. Pepper will come out. And the more pressure I put on it, the more the Dr. Pepper is just going to go everywhere. Or I can come back here. Don't worry, I'm not going to do it. The more pressure you put it under, it doesn't change what's actually in the can. It just changes how far it's going to spray out all over everything. In our lives, in our hearts, when the pressure gets on, when the pressure of life or our work or our family or whatever it is, the more pressure that comes on us, what we will find is what will spew out of our hearts is what is actually inside our hearts. And we like to say things like, no, when the pressure comes on, something comes out of me that's not really me. No, that's in us. And this lady, when the pressure is on and she has this valuable thing and there's people all in the room and everybody's watching and Jesus keeps talking about dying and there's rumors going around that all these religious leaders are mad at him. When the pressure is on, what spews out of her heart is her absolute love and devotion for Jesus. What's in your heart? The irony is Judas and this woman are in the same place. But they leave with very different results. The difference is just the focus of their heart, not where they were, not who they trusted, not who they had followed around, not where they went to church. It was what was in their heart. And this woman was prepared for devotion, and Judas was prepared for rejection. Oh, that we might be consumed in our hearts for Jesus. What are you prepared for? The story continues in verse 12. On the first day of unleavened bread, when they sacrificed the Passover lamb, his disciples asked, "Where do you want us to go and prepare the Passover so that you may eat it?" So he sent two of his disciples and told them, "Go into the city, and a man carrying a jar of water will meet you. Follow him. Wherever he enters, tell the owner of the house, 'The teacher says, this is where my guest room, or where is my guest room where I may eat the Passover with my disciples? And he will show you a large room upstairs furnished and ready. Make preparations for us there.' So the disciples went out, entered the city, and found it just as he told them, and they prepared the Passover." Stop there. It's almost Passover time. Now, this is a big holiday. In Israel, this was the biggest holiday. Like, this was Easter and Christmas and everything combined into one for them. Like, this was it. And his disciples come to him, Jesus' disciples come to him, and they ask one simple question: "Jesus, how, where, what should we do in order to prepare for the Passover for you?" Now, hopefully that question jumps out at us because we're talking about being prepared today. And so Jesus, in a very specific circumstance, answers that question for these disciples. Here is exactly how you can prepare. Jesus gives them a list of instructions. Here's their list. Okay, I want you to travel. I want you to go into the city, and you're going to meet this person. You're going to know who he is. He's going to be carrying a jar of water, and you're going to follow this person. I want you to then follow this person into a house, and when you get to that house, you're going to meet the owner of that house, and you're going to deliver this message. This is where the teacher, this is where the Lord wants to have the Passover, and he's going to show you to this room. It's going to be a room upstairs, and it's going to be fully furnished, and you will find that location, and when you find that location, here's what you're supposed to do. You're supposed to prepare the meal. Jesus tells them exactly what they're supposed to do. And how do they respond? They go and do it. That's it. That's the big, deep theological answer. Jesus says, here is what you're supposed to do, and they go and they do it. And what's going to happen as a result of what they do? See, we get to the exciting part of the story in just a moment. We're going to see the Lord's Supper. If you're unfamiliar with what the Lord's Supper is, I want to invite you back next week. We're going to be doing the Lord's Supper together. It's a really cool time of just seeing what Jesus has to say about the sacrifice he is about to make. And it's easy for us to want to jump ahead in the story and say, that's the key part. That's the cool part. Let's talk about that. But the reality is the Lord's Supper doesn't happen if the disciples don't follow Jesus' instructions to prepare for what is going to happen. And so often in our lives, we want to just see Jesus do the cool stuff, do the big things, do the overwhelming things that everybody's going to talk about. But the question is, are we willing to put in the time to just prepare for what he is willing to do? How can we be prepared? We secondly see this in the story. Spend time in ways that honors God. Spend your time in ways that honors God. Follow his instructions. Follow what he says to do, the little things, the everyday things. See, this didn't just arrange itself. Certainly Jesus had a plan. Certainly Jesus explained how it was going to happen. But it didn't happen by just this poof. It's there. I mean, don't get me wrong, we see God's hand of work all over this, right? Like, Jesus' instructions are super weird here. Like, you're going to see a guy carrying a thing of water. Can you imagine, like, being the disciples and you're just walking around, like, okay, and this guy walks by with a thing of water. You can imagine this guy, he's, like, carrying this, and the disciples are running up to him. Hey, we're going to follow you now. Okay. Get to the house. And they're like, so Jesus told us you're going to have a room. Is that cool? I was like, yeah, upstairs. We're good. I mean, these are weird instructions, and we see God's hand all over them, but the disciples just go and they do it. Why do they go and do it? Because they've seen every time Jesus said to do something, it worked out. They don't stop and question. They don't say, Jesus, this is a weird plan. They'd be willing to do it. See, here's the hard truth. If we're lazy in our relationship with God, we probably won't see much activity from God. Far too many of us want God to do something incredible, but we're not willing to do the basics that he tells us to do. God, I want you to be really active in my life, and I want a deep passion in my life. And God's like, hey, I gave you a Bible. Have you cracked it open anytime recently? And we're like, well, God, I just want you to speak to me. And he's like, there. God, I'd love some more intimacy in my relationship with you. And he's like, hey, do you ever pray beyond like just asking me for something? God, can't you just do that without me praying? God, I'd really like people to have a community with and to be involved with. And you're just like, hey, I gave you this thing called the church. And you taking advantage of that? God, I want deep relationships with people, and I want people to check on me when something's going wrong in my life. And all right, do you get to know the people at the church who are sitting around you, or do you dart out as soon as the thing's over? Oh, we love all the things that Jesus is willing to offer. The question is, are we too lazy to do what he says? Here's how it works. Well, years ago, I took a group of students to Washington, D.C. We went for one day. If you've ever been to Washington, D.C., you need a lot more than one day in Washington, D.C. I decided we were gonna do the whole thing one day. Here's what we did in one day. We took a tour of the Capitol building, saw the White House, saw the Washington Monument, the Lincoln Monument, the Vietnam Memorial, the Bill of Rights, the Constitution, the Natural History Museum, the National Mall, the National Zoo, and we went to Chinatown. One day. I had a schedule of that metro thing that goes around. I had it timed out to the minute. I'm telling you, I was like, hut, let's go. I was a drill sergeant that day. I had this one kid. They were walking along. True story. And they were walking along, and this little girl was like, John, my feet hurt so bad. Can we please stop? And I was like, we don't have time to stop. I looked at my watch. I said, sit on this bench. We will be back in 17 minutes. You better be ready to walk then. We came back. We got her. We were on a schedule. We had to take advantage of each moment. And at the end of the day, all the students were like, man, we're so glad we got the whole experience. But the reality is you didn't get that experience unless you were willing to just go all out for it. I know that's silly, and I promise I'm not going to take you all to Washington, D.C. in one day. Yes, resting is part of honoring God with our time. Don't neglect that. But how many of us take the time to prepare? How many of us would say, look, when I look at my relationship with God, I can honestly say, I'm not being lazy in it. I'm pursuing God with all that I am. How many of us take time as we come in Sunday morning after Sunday morning to prepare our hearts for our time of worship? To ask God to do something. To ask God to move. To ask Him what we need to do to respond to His glory and His goodness. How many of us do actually spend time in reading the Bible or in prayer, because these aren't obligations, they are privileges of our relationship with God? How do we know if we're spending our time wisely? How do we know if what we're doing is honoring God? Here's a good test. Can you thank God? Like whenever you get done, whatever you're doing, can you thank God for it? I'm going to tell you, you're going to find out, like when you're honoring God by spending time with your family, you're going to find, I can thank God for that. When you're honoring God by spending time in His Word or in prayer, you're going to be able to thank God for that. When you're honoring God with spending time with a community of believers, you're going to be able to thank God for that. When you're honoring God by just being a hard worker and faithful in your employment, you will be able to thank God for that. When you're honoring God by stopping the busyness of your day and finding out how the person around you is doing, you'll be able to thank God for that. But you're also going to find there are moments that you're running through some things in your life and you get to the end of it and you say, I can't thank God for that. And that's a good indication maybe it's not supposed to be there. Maybe it's not a good use of your time. Man, I want to be like these disciples, that even the mundane, even the normal things in my life are leading towards something beautiful that Jesus is getting ready to do. Let's read the rest of this part of the story. When evening came, He arrived with the 12. While they were reclining and eating, Jesus said, truly I tell you, one of you will betray me, one who is eating with me. They began to be distressed and say to Him one by one, surely not I. He said to them, it is one of the 12, the one who is dipping the bread in the bowl with me. For the Son of Man will go just as is written about Him, but woe to the man by whom the Son of Man is betrayed. It would be better for him if he had not been born. Stop there. Next week we're going to examine the Lord's Supper. We're going to examine the crucifixion. We're going to see how Jesus gave His life as a ransom for many. But today we're just focused on the preparation that went into that event. And in this story we have Judas. He's the one who's going to betray Jesus. One of the 12, he's a guy who has followed Jesus, had given up everything in his life to follow after Jesus. 3 years walking around with Jesus, under His teaching, under His discipleship, seeing all the miracles. And Judas has already decided that he is going to betray Jesus. See, we saw that just a few verses ago. Judas saw what's happening with Jesus. He doesn't understand what's happening with Jesus. We're not told all the reasons. We're just told after he sees this lady give everything, give her heart to Jesus, Judas made up his mind to go and betray Jesus for a small sum of money. Judas's heart had not been in the right place. His time had not been in the right place. Judas was prepared just for the wrong thing. So Jesus gathers his disciples. This is the last time they're all going to be together as one unit. He gathers all his disciples together. And we see the depths of Jesus' love even for Judas. Jesus could have just looked at Judas and said, hey, man, I know what you're doing. Get out of here. You disgust me. Like, we read this story and we think, Judas, you disgust me. What are you doing? And yet, Jesus sits there with his disciples and for giving him one last chance. With all his disciples there, including Judas, Jesus simply says, I know. I know. He's talking to all of them, but please understand, he's talking to Judas. I know. I know what you have been doing. I know where your heart is. I know where your time has been spent. Judas, it's not worth it. It will be worse than you could have ever imagined. You will regret it. You will regret it more than anybody has ever regretted anything in all of history. In saying this, Jesus gives Judas one last opportunity to listen. Judas doesn't listen. Oh, he hears Jesus. It's very clear, very apparent that Judas was there, that Judas heard. He had the opportunity to repent. He had the opportunity to become new and made new in Jesus, and instead, he continued in the wrong preparation. We read that and we think, well, I don't know if I'm preparing in my life really well, but I'm not Judas. Like, at least I'm not Judas. I gotta ask, like, if that's what we're gonna walk away from today thinking, like, at least I'm not Judas, like, is that the bar? Is that like what we're trying to get? Like, I just got to be better than Judas, the guy who did the thing that, like, is the worst thing in all of history. The question is not, am I doing better than Judas? The question is, am I listening to what Jesus has to say to me? Not just hearing, am I listening? See, there's a difference between hearing and listening. Listening means it truly impacts and changes the very core of who I am. So what happens when Jesus looks in my life and he says, I know what you've been doing, and I know where your heart is, and I know where your time has been spent? If Jesus says that in your life, is that a good thing or a bad thing? Because it only is different depending on how we've been preparing. Hopefully, when we hear Jesus say, I know what you're doing, and I know where your heart is, and I know where your time has been spent, hopefully we say, thank you, Jesus. And I'm glad you know where my heart is. I'm glad you know where I've been trying to spend my time. But let's be honest, some of us hear that, and we think, oh, Jesus, do you have to know all that? There's some of that I don't want you to know. Hear? And do we listen? Because there's a difference. I have no doubt all of you hear me right now. The question is, do we listen? I had a teacher in middle school. His name was Mr. Pascal. Mr. Pascal was the weirdest teacher I've ever had. I say that in the nicest way possible. He ate chalk. Like just during class, he would sit there on a trash can eating chalk during class. Strange man. But he taught me one valuable thing. He would ask us about reading and the reading we were doing for class, and he would say, "Did you read or did you look at the words?" He said, because like you can look at all the words, you can say all the words, you can hear, you can do them out loud, whatever you want, but that doesn't mean you read something. When you read something, you understood it. And I'll say that lesson, strangest man ever, chalk enjoyment and all. But it changed the way I read. Now, I'm probably one of the slowest readers you will ever meet now because of Mr. Pascal. But I read to understand, not just to get through it. When Jesus is speaking into our lives, are we listening just to say we heard? Or are we listening to understand? Because I can promise, listening to understand takes a lot longer. And it takes us thinking and working through and stressing to figure out, okay, Jesus, what is it that you're saying? Like, I heard the words, but what is it that you're saying to me? If we're listening, it will impact us. It will change us. It will take our time and our attention, but it is certainly worth it. Because that's what it looks like to be prepared for God's activity. Are you ready? Are you prepared? Yes, you are. And I am. We are each prepared for something. The question is, what are you prepared for? Are you prepared to see God do incredible things in your life and in the lives of people around you? Because if you're not, you are being prepared. But it's by the enemy. And it is not for your benefit. And it is not for the beauty that God is willing to do. Oh, that we might be a people who are prepared. In just a moment, the praise band is going to come. We're going to sing one last song. I want to encourage us to do one thing. As we sing this song, let's not just sing a song. But let's listen to God. Like I trust in this time that God is speaking into our hearts and our lives. I hope that God is speaking into your hearts and your life. Would we take this time to listen? May we use this time wisely. And as we hear, may we simply do what the disciples did and respond to whatever it is that he is saying to do. Maybe you need to get with somebody else in this room and just spend some time in prayer with somebody else. If that's what God is saying, then do it. Maybe you need somebody to talk to. And I'm up here on this little box drum thing, and just pull me off. John, I need to talk to you. JP is up here. Pull him aside. Say, JP, I need to talk to you. Just go to a random person in the room. Just say, hey, you look like somebody to talk to. I need to talk to you. If God's saying to do something, would we simply say, okay, God. Because my heart is going to be so consumed by you, I don't care if I look foolish. I don't care if I look silly. I don't care if people think that I'm crazy. I just want to follow you. I want to be prepared for you. So as we sing, call this a time of response. You simply respond whatever God is laying on your heart. You be obedient. This is you and him. Let's stand together and worship.
thank you for your Son, because there's no name that's higher than the name of Jesus. God, I pray as we leave, God, that we live intentionally for you, and we listen intently for your words and your instructions, that we listen and not hear them. God, take us as we leave. Let us be shining examples for you. In your name we pray. Amen. You have a great week.